Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is iRunShiv, or Shiv for short. I appreciate you being here today. Today, we're going to be discussing one of the craziest builds I've ever seen for the Druid, and that involves Nature's Fury, which uses Wind, Earth, and Bear skills to combine to do some insane damage. I've been working so hard on other builds, I haven't had time to dive into Druid, but luckily, my friend and mod went through the Druid and made an insane build that I think you need to see. I'm going to link his Twitch page down below. Go give him a follow.
I just had, oh my. I just had, oh my.
You see that chunk? Jeez.
I might have did 600 plus K damage there. I don't know.
Don't worry, Ryan. I did the math. You did 1,000,008. So let's dive right into the build. First things we want to talk about, our key passive on this build is going to be Nature's Fury, which means when we use an Earth skill, there's a chance that we cast a Storm skill, and vice versa. When you use a Storm, there's a chance you cast an Earth skill. So moving through, let's talk about what each of the abilities are and how they are used. First, we're going to have Wind Shear. Wind Shear is going to be a blade that deals some damage. It's ultimately going to be your main resource generation, right? But on top of that, it has a 20% chance to make enemies vulnerable, which is always important. And then it grants 3 additional spirit for each enemy hit. So you're going to be able to just gain resources much faster. Moving down into our right click, this is a very strong source of damage on this build. It's going to be Landslide. This alone at level 64 can do something almost 400k damage if you get lucky enough. So there's a lucky hit chance. Crush enemies between 2 pillars of earth, dealing up to 105% damage. Moving forward, after Landslide damages an enemy 4 times, the next hit will immobilize enemies for 3 seconds. Now let's go to our first actual ability, Earthen Bulwark. Earthen Bulwark is going to be a rock surrounding you, like almost like an armor system, granting barrier that absorbs 45% of your base life and damage. That's also just really makes you more tanky. It's awesome. And makes you unstoppable while it's active, which is great. Casting Earthen Bulwark grants 18% of your life as Fortify as well, which is also very good. So this is just your very tanky button. Alongside that, you're going to hit Cyclone Armor, which is going to be a secondary ability. This is more so for tier 4. Once we got into tier 4, we found that we needed a little more tankiness. Cyclone Armor does provide that. Powerful winds surround you, granting 10% non-physical damage reduction. But the active on this ability is amazing because you can actually knock back enemies and make them vulnerable. See what I mean here? Enemies who are knocked back by Cyclone Armor are also slowed by 70%, which is great. But then the best part, enemies knocked back by Cyclone Armor become vulnerable for 3 seconds. The passive note here, increase your non-physical resistances by 15%, just making you of a more tanky character. We're going to put 1 point into Nature's Reach because with the aspects on our armor, there's actually an ability that lets us have some significant range with our trample ability, but I don't want to jump to that too soon. We'll talk about that in the legendary segment. Just know that you want 1 point roughly there. Elemental Exposure, your storm skills have a 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable, just adding more chance for vulnerability. We're only really using 1 point here and Charged Atmosphere to get us over to Bad Omen. There's a 30% lucky hit chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable or stunned enemy or immobilized enemy that a lightning bolt will strike them for an additional 55% damage. Since this is going to have a lot of stun and movement and immobility in this build, that's going to happen a lot. So this is a key passive to pick up. Moving into our main damage sources, one is going to be, this is the strongest ability in this kit, and that is Trample. Trample shapeshifts into a werebear, you become unstoppable, and you knock enemies back. If you knock them into terrain, you do an additional set of damage and stun them. Trample does an increased amount of bonus damage. It's reduced after you hit the first enemy. Casting Trample grants 25% base life as Fortify as well, so another source of fortification and health. Alongside that, a lot of our movement displacement of enemies is going to come with Boulder, which is going to line us up to use Trample to stun them into the wall, right? So Boulder is going to be a positioning tool where we're going to kite the enemies, use Boulder to throw them into the wall, and then ultimately use Trample to shove them inside the wall, get the stun, and do a ton of damage. So Boulder, unearth a large rolling boulder that rapidly knocks back enemies, dealing 46.2% damage for each hit. When Boulder reaches the end of its path, enemies hit are slowed by 30% for 3 seconds. If Boulder overpowered, enemies are stunned for 4 seconds instead. When you have Fortify at all, Boulder has a 20% chance to increase critical strike, which is really strong because there's Fortify in almost all of our abilities. Some other passives to pick up: Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal 15% increased damage to slowed, immobilize, or knockback enemies. So you're getting the gist of how this build works. There's going to be a lot of that going on in this build. Critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for 6.6% of your base life. So even more ways to get fortification. When you have Fortify for over 50% of your maximum life, your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage. Since we're getting Fortify all the time, this should be up relatively almost all the time. Let's get down to the ultimate tree. Just some more passive nodes we're picking up here. Nature Magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. Your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Your Storm skills deal 12% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. This is just more synergize This is just more synergy with everything we've been talking about. The whole job in this build is to throw enemies into a corner and stun them, and then use our key aspects on our legendaries to do insane damage, but we'll talk about that shortly. And then everything is just buffing that specific task, right? Nature Magic deals 2% increased damage, triple the bonus if an Earth skill is a skill cast after a Storm skill, or a Storm skill is a skill cast after an Earth. Since we're rotating back and forth, this is going to help us. Like I said, the key passive here is Nature's Fury. Casting an Earth skill has a 20% chance to cast a Storm, and vice versa. Just for a rough idea on how the skill rotation would work, it's going to look like this. You're going to kite and line up enemies. You're going to bring them to some sort of location that's going to have a wall close by. You're going to boulder them over directly towards the wall, trample them into the wall to stun them, Cyclone Armor to put vulnerable on, and then use your landslide to do insane damage. The nice thing is, all throughout that process, a lot of these key aspects are going to proc, because the downside of this build theoretically would be super long cooldowns. But these aspects instead make it so your cooldowns can be reduced almost indefinitely, and also the hard-hitting abilities that should have these long cooldowns, now that have teeny cooldowns, are hitting twice or thrice or 5 times as hard. So let's look at the first one. As you can see here, Trample now summons 6 landside pillars that you can see dunk, 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 dropping out as you use Trample every time. Pillars of Earth during this duration deal 152% damage. Trample is now also a nature skill and an earth skill, so it's considered an earth skill leading into our passive. And this is strong because when Nature's Fury, which is our passive when we rotate between Storm and Earth, which is going to be happening all the time in this build, when Nature's Fury key passive triggers a free skill, which happens 20% of the time, your non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type are reduced by 8 seconds. This is a strong one. Casting a Storm skill grants Earth skills 45% critical strike damage for 4 seconds, and then casting an Earth skill increases the critical strike chance of Storm skills by 12%. When you have Fortify, your Earth skills will get +2 ranks, which is always going to be strong, and since you're fortified nearly all the time in this build, all of your Earth skills have +2 ranks, including the skills that are now Earth, like Trample. One of the other crucial legendary aspects that's imprinted on this necklace is the fact that that landslide that comes out when you use your Trample now happens an additional time for more damage. And if you remember that boss in the beginning of the video, he did one full set of damage that was roughly 300 to 400k, and then the second one cleaned up for about 600+k, getting him over 1 million damage. Imprinted on this ring is an additional increase to critical chance against injured enemies, and also when you are healthy, there's a 38% chance increase to your crowd controls. This legendary aspect is really strong for your right click or your landslide. Your core skills deal up to 34% increased damage based on the amount of fortified that you have, and since you're fortified all the time, this thing can do insane damage. To quickly show off the spirit boons we're going to select, it is going to be Wariness from the Deer. Take 10% reduced damage from elites, which is strong for tier 4 because there's a bunch of elites. Gain 5% increased critical strike chance with your abilities, and then 30% increased critical strike damage, which is unbelievably strong for a passive. Lightning damage has a 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing 20% lightning damage to all the surrounding enemies. And then lastly, dealing damage has a 50% chance to restore 10 spirit, so you have a spirit gain on top of your initial attack. The Paragon board we're first going to select is going to be Earth and Devastation. Earth skills deal 30% increased damage to enemies affected by crowd control, which obviously is going to be impactful for this specific build. So that's going to do it for today's build. This is one of those you have to see it to believe it builds. You do insane numbers and you get your cooldowns back instantaneously and just do it again. If you guys like this kind of content, hitting the subscribe button down below, coming over to Twitch and hitting the follow button there for me would mean a lot. We are a Diablo partner, so we do get those gifted equals amount situation and drops on Twitch every single week. Coming over to that channel would help me out greatly. I'll be gone on vacation this week, back next Wednesday. I'll see you guys then.